Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. Happy Thursday out there. What is the primary problem in society? Well, it's the breakdown of the family. Sister Lucy said this at Fatima. What's the primary problem causing the breakdown of the family? We're going to solve that for you today on this special Steph Gordon episode of R4R. What is the main problem between married couples, between husband and wife, and therefore between parents and their kids? You probably heard us talk about some of these things before, but we've never dealt with it comprehensively. So I will start out by asking you, we've got the lovely Steph present today. Do you think that you suffer from the primary marital problem in the family, in the country, in the West, in the world today? Well, you can't know what that is until you listen to today's show. I will name it. No gimmicks here. There are parts to the main problem, but it's relatively binary. You either have these symptoms or you don't. And we'll give you some of the symptoms in today's show. So this will be, as soon as we introduce things, you're going to be able to tell. Honestly, through a head check, I either think in my marriage I have this problem or I don't. Most of you will have it, if you ask me. And it's also, by the way, the main reason that young men report they don't want to get married. So if we could solve today's problem, and we will pitch a solution once we've named what the problem is, then that's solving a big problem in society. What's up, Steph?
Hello, everybody.
I mean, I'm not saying what's up like we woke up in the same bed and we've been together, but it feels weird to be hanging out with a friend and then we do a live stream, or a best friend and then we start
like
live
have to
streaming.
pretend like this is the first time we've seen each other today. Like, good afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, but it's just always, it never gets to be quite normal. I mean, you're always behind the camera and helping us out. And on today's show, you need to be in front of the camera. So do you want to name what the main problem is that keeps married couples from being truly intimate, it keeps their kids relatively gender dysphoric, and it keeps young men from wanting to marry today? Or
well, we were discussing that this morning, and I think we were each coming up with different but interesting components of this problem. And from my perspective, it's always the husband not taking his role seriously and the wife not taking her role seriously. So it really, I think from my perspective, it just boils down to the sex roles and the confusion that we're seeing in society, really among Catholics, about what the duties are between the husband and the wife. And those duties aren't being interchangeable, that they're specific, and really having a mind towards just understanding what they are, first off, and then enacting them.
I mean, that's definitely the formal cause of the main marital problem now, and the problem that men are opting against marriage. And that's always the best answer. But I think that that runs the risk of people saying, well, we've heard you guys say that before. Mm-hmm. So I'll give the less good Aristotelian answer, meaning I won't give the formal causal answer, which you just gave, which is the real answer. It sounds more specific to deal kind of in material and efficient causation. It's men have a protective guarding reflex against giving orders. This is literally it. The central breakdown of society accrues to this. Men are protective guarding, meaning they're engaged in prior restraint, giving orders.
Right.
They're prior restraining themselves rather than posterior restraining themselves. I'll explain the difference in a second. Against giving orders because they know in their heart of hearts, the 99% of men out there for whom this is relevant, that they won't be heeded. They will not be yielded to or submitted to.
Do you think also that men, the reluctance to give orders is also just they're not comfortable in their own skin or understand their own authority or what God really created them for in the Christian household, that they haven't exercised that muscle, so to speak. So it's either a little bit overboard at first or not enough. And there's just they have a very hard time managing how exactly to exercise that, or don't understand it at all.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, excellence, arete, which is virtue, is not an act but a habit. Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics for Aristotle. So you can't be excellent by doing something once. And men, what happens with our audience, Rules for Retrograde's audience, now that we've named what the main problem is, they hear me saying this stuff, they read me saying this stuff, they refer sort of indirectly to you saying this stuff, whether it's men, women reading their wives' books if they're reading your book, or if they're watching our other channel, CMask, Christian Masculinism. They'll hear us saying men need to be leaders, women need to be followers, husbands need to lead, wives need to follow. And because excellence is not an act but a habit, they'll try it the first time and it doesn't sound natural, it's not natural. Society, for the first time in human history, has gone away from training, educating men to being leaders, but rather society's making men docile followers and women to be leaders. I mean, literally, there's scholarship programs, commercials, back of Cheerio boxes, women's sports programs, young women's politicians programs in some universities that are all educating young women.
And I'd even say,
particularly in TV and movies, to be leaders.
Men are being pressured into supporting those things as well. They're being shamed in society. It's one thing to be like, okay, speaking directly to women, which they were trying that with all sorts of social programming. But now the social programming is even extending to, all right, now that we've convinced women that this is what they should do, now they're shaming men and telling women don't ever date or marry somebody who doesn't agree with this sort of social programming.
Of course. And now that the momentum is gathered, the ball is rolling down the hill, getting men to do something, enhancing their passivity is like shooting fish in a barrel. It's very easy. And we are trying to stop the ball rolling down the hill with superhuman strength. And now we're acquiring new allies on the right, bigger voices than just the intra-Catholic voices. A lot of them are Catholics, but Catholicism has failed on this issue. People will say, Tim, you're reaching more and more outside of Catholic circles. Well, Catholicism just failed. Trad Catholicism failed. It failed you. It failed us. Tried to ostracize us largely over these 2 books. So yeah, we're gathering powerful forces on the right, maybe conservatives who also are Catholic, to help us stop the ball rolling, encouraging men to be passive and women to be leaders. And we're going to start trying to push that ball back up the mountain where it belongs. But of course, let's get back to the name of the problem. I said if we get specific, and after this we'll call out some stuff and then we'll get into the heart of what we're really saying. But if we get really specific, I said it's like prior restraint men are applying to their own speech, their own mandate office, their office to issue mandates. Right. Hey, Steph, I want you to work on X, Y, and Z today. A lot of times I don't have Y or Z. Sometimes it's just one thing, or sometimes it's none things. Just as we have, hey, kids, we want you to, we have them working on stuff below. I want you to work on an X, Y, and Z. Well, me and mom are up here. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's nothing at all. Men nowadays, I literally sometimes will talk to my neighbors and they're like, do you guys, it's funny because I'm in a non-Catholic part of the country, a Baptist and Methodist part of the country. And I didn't know so many of my neighbors and people here in Hattiesburg are listening, and they'll be like, okay, so you guys always just seem like you're chilling when we come by. Or like, that's kind of what we do. But it's when I'm like, hey, Steph, work on this 1 or 2 things today, or these 3 or 4 things all week. The rest of the time, we're just chilling and having a great time. Men, by prior restraint, this refers to the lawfare involved in 1776, meaning that even though with the First Amendment, after it had been passed in 1791, there would be no prior restraint on speech, even though you could still go to jail for saying certain things, right? Perjury is the best known example, or a sworn oath breaking. There are tons of other instances of illegal speech. Yelling fire in a crowded theater is not protected. You can posteriorly be imprisoned for certain speech. We don't have absolute free speech in America, but the American Revolution stood for, and has enshrined in the First Amendment, the idea of no prior restraint, meaning the government will not show up and shush you before you say it, but they can show up where you're supposed to say, something against Brandenburg jurisprudence. You're going to incite a riot, or you're going to perjure yourself, and wait for you to do it, and then restrain you posteriorly. So this is what I'm saying men are doing to themselves, what America promised it would never do to its citizens. Men are just saying, I'm not going to issue orders on my wife. I mean, this is like 99% of probably you guys listening, and probably all of your neighbors out in the burbs, or the cucks who live in the urbs, maybe yuppies with their wives, if they even get married in cities anymore. They just say, look, I don't want to be disobeyed, and I don't want to fight, so I just won't issue orders.
And that really does boil down to the women being completely out of control.
Yes.
Because it's what you're discussing there is that the men feeling really a lack of control over the household, because the woman is so horribly out of control.
Yes.
And has absolutely... unfortunately, Christian women are in the worst state ever. They have no self-guiding principle or no restraint on themselves. Most Christian women I know and hang out with, they have a self-guiding principle that is scripture and just following what the Lord expected of a Catholic wife. But even Catholic wives out here are they have a problem with us because they basically just want to do whatever the hell they want to do. And they don't want any repercussions, and they don't want anybody challenging what they are doing or saying or thinking throughout the day. And if the husband does that, manages to try to get reins of the household, the woman is effectively training him not to do that by all sorts of bad behaviors.
The woman together with all of society.
Right.
So people, because of feminism, people are obsessed with egalitarianism. We'll show at least how it's both parties' fault. We'll talk about the parental model of spouses. Whose fault is it if you give your kid an order, your kid refuses to follow it the way teenagers do when they have weak fathers? Teenagers will start to rebel. They don't do this when they have strong fathers. No. The household does not devolve when there's a loving, strong father in the home. For teenagers, that's just the cucked men in the suburbs who couldn't control their wives, even for the first 12 years of life, when it was easy to control your 12-year-old or younger.
And we're noticing
the test is, are you a household that's bad at managing teenagers? That's the first symptom of the symptomology. We're going to give you some other symptoms.
And you can always tell that that's the case because the utter lack of respect that the father is getting from the children, which will stem from the mother.
Absolutely.
And you can always tell these households are out of order with just look and see how the teenagers are regarding the father.
Absolutely.
They've been sold, we've all been sold this pack of goods that are these lies that teenagers will always kind of treat their fathers with like contempt and like, oh, dad, you're old. That kind of stuff. That is not the case from what I've seen in households where the father commands respect because he's actually doing good by his family. And those rightly ordered households, I'm seeing quite the opposite. I'm seeing the cases where the teenagers are actually going to the father for advice, wanting to please the father. It's not this like daytime television version of like the Christian household where the dad's doing his best and everyone's rolling in their eyes at him in the corner.